Okay, I think we're going to get started, and we're recording, so we're good, right? Excellent. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here with us. This is the Utah League of Cities and Towns Legislative Policy Committee. Today is November 16th, 2020. My name is Dawn Ramsey, and I serve as mayor of the city of South Jordan and have the privilege of chairing this committee as first vice president of the league. And so I appreciate each of you for being here to be part of this important work. And I wish I could see you all in person. I look forward to the day that we can do this together again. In the meantime, thank you for logging in. Our opening matter of business is to adopt the minutes from our October 19th, 2020 LPC meeting. Those minutes were sent out. Is there somebody who's had an opportunity to review the minutes and would like to make a motion to approve those minutes? Or if you have any changes you'd like made, now is the time.
Mayor, I think we can take that motion in the chat and say, just like last time, can vote in the chat.
Okay, that would be great. I'm looking, going, I can't see who's on this meeting, so. Thank you. Okay, we have a motion from Rod Mann to approve these minutes. Let's see, actually, that was the last one to come in, but that's the one I stated. So we're going to take a motion from Rod Mann with a second by Kate Bradshaw. All in favor of approving these minutes, please just say aye or give us a thumbs up in the chat. Okay, I think it's looking good. Somebody's going to tell me when we've reached the point where we have a quorum, right? We're good? Awesome. Okay, those minutes are approved as they stand. Thank you so much. All right, item 2 on our agenda, we have some issue tiers. We have Victoria here with us, Victoria Ashby. We appreciate all she does. And we're going to turn some time over to you, Victoria, to lead us through this next discussion, our policy tiers.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's good to be with all of you via the internet once again. As we go forward, we're going to try to make this a little bit more interactive this time. So if you have questions as we proceed forward, please feel free to raise your hand, and the wizard behind the curtain, my colleague Nick Jarvis, will facilitate those questions. So we want to make sure that we can get your questions answered, or, you know, if you want to contribute to the discussion, feel free to do that. We are also going to do some polling questions as we proceed. And these will be on policy concepts that have come forth. We're not taking a vote like we do during the session to put a position on a bill. During these questions, these are more around draft legislation or policy concepts, but we want to get a feel for what the opinion is out there. So please participate in those polls as we go forward. I just want to make clear that we are not polling right now for positions on bills. All right, Nick, if you would go to the next slide. We have put this tier table up in previous meetings. Again, this is a table that we created for our board in the spring to, one, list all the many items that league staff has been working on, but also to help us prioritize through our board the issues. And the green on this table represents updates or changes from the last time we showed the policy tiers. I want to be clear that some of these changes are just breaking out some issues that we already had on the tiers to a more itemized list. That's definitely the case with Land Use Task Force and public safety, but some of these issues are also new to the tier tables. Those would be the state homeless coordinator, fireworks, emergency authority or emergency quorums, and legal notice with the changes from print publications to online publications. And these tier tables, again, changed. We already have some new issues that have come in because of the interim meetings this week and just getting closer to session. So we'll be adding those and also vetting those through our board again. But we wanted to put this in front of you so you can see the items that we have been working on over the summer and as we ramp up to session. And okay, I think we can go on to the next slide unless there are questions. All right, we're now going to discuss COVID-19. I'll turn it back to you, Madam Chair.
Okay. As I'm trying to unmute. Okay, thank you, Victoria. Appreciate your clarification of those tiers and the issues that we're up against that, as I said, right now, we discussed, we're not taking a position on those yet, but that's what's ahead. Next, COVID-19. Cam and Victoria, I think you're going to take this together. There's a couple of different discussion headings under this, so I'll turn the time over to the two of you.
Cam, you're on mute.
I know. Oh, it got me. It's been a few weeks since the mute button has gotten me, and today's the day. The one topic everybody wants to discuss is COVID-19, right? But we do want to bring this up because not only does it impact public health, not only does it impact the fact that we're still doing LPC remotely, but it is also going to impact our advocacy at the Capitol, and that's urgent for all of us. For now, as you've seen from our blast email last week, we are currently in a 2-week window under the governor's most recent order from November 9th to November 23rd that requires masks statewide, requires the social distancing, and restricts casual gatherings. For the first time, there is a true enforcement component. There's an enforcement piece on businesses with a potential fine for masks wearing amongst employees and the social distancing there. And then if there are social gatherings, large-scale social gatherings, organizers of those social gatherings can face a potential fine. It'll be interesting to see what happens in light of some of the high-profile social gatherings that have occurred to protest high-level government officials in recent days. The reason for all of this, of course, is the record number of cases, hospitalizations, and deaths we've been seeing, and a concern both locally and nationally that if this is the baseline, that Utah's spike going into the holidays could be catastrophic. Likewise, the impact on healthcare professionals has already been dramatic. We have a town hall scheduled for Monday, December 7th at 3. That's our next scheduled one. We'll call another one if necessary between now and then. I participate in regular phone calls with Governor Herbert and members of the task force. Over the last couple of days, we've been waiting to see additional guidance come out for Thanksgiving. We are anticipating that any day that there will be some recommendations at the state level for how to handle Thanksgiving and the social gatherings that usually occur during that time. And the order expires a week from today, so we'll be expecting additional direction once that order expires. At this point, I don't have anything new to report, and so stay tuned. Once we know something on that front, then we'll be sure to pass it along through the blast emails. Nick, you can go on the next slide. Perfect. The key thing to recognize, though, is the impact that COVID-19 is going to have on the in-person activity at the Capitol. Victoria, I'll turn it over to you to discuss that piece.
All right, thanks, Cam. And real quick, I posted these slides in the chat box, a link to it, and we'll also have that on our website. And if you do want to use the chat, please remember to post those to everyone in the meeting. Okay, many of you have seen our policy prisms here and our pillars. As we go into session, we'll be using these prisms to look at each bill and the impacts it has on local government, and then base our advocacy on the answer to those questions coming from the legislation. Nick, if you'd go to the next slide. So we mentioned this last time, and we're going to beat the drum many times during this LPC. This session is going to be different. The one thing that won't be different is that apparently they are already breaking their previous record on bills, so maybe that's not different. That's just the same old, keep beating their previous records on the number of bills. But there will be no extracurricular activities or events at the Capitol. So we have had to cancel our local officials day, which is usually a great advocacy day for us up on the Hill, bringing local officials, all of you to come meet our legislators and also students up there. But we will not be able to do that this year. It is still unclear also what we will be able to do, if we will actually get to be there in person, if the legislature will do a hybrid, or if everything will be online. The online advocacy is definitely tricky, as we learned from special session this spring. And so we really need all of your help. And we need that help in advance so the groundwork is laid before session starts. We need you to go talk to your legislators and the new incumbents, meet them, educate them on city issues. You can see here that 22 of the 54 legislators who stood by us on HB 172 a couple years ago, which created an oversight committee on political subdivisions. We successfully defeated that bill in part because we had these great partners at the legislature who are no longer there now. And we will likely see 3 of the 11 members of the Political Subdivisions Committee replaced. And that's the committee that often hears legislation central to governance and duties of cities. And so we really need all of you to reach out and talk to your legislators the closer we get to session. I think, Nick, we go to the next slide. I'm forgetting what's next, but just in case, if not, we can go back one. Yeah, let's keep going. So this is a table of legislators who we have probably changing seats. Give Nick a second there. This table shows those legislators who have vacated their seats either through retirement or losing their elections, and who are replacing them. So this is really who we are focusing on for now, although we need you to focus on all legislators. And you can see over there in the right column, the new incumbents for you to reach out to. The ones in purple, we are hoping to know the final results tomorrow when the canvass is done. Those seats are very close right now, and you can see that some of those seats are people who are replacing or have been friendly to cities in the past. So please take a look if any of these legislators in the middle column were your previous legislators, and see who you need to reach out to develop those relationships before session starts. And Nick, you can put up there that we're giving you this as a homework assignment to do this as soon as possible so that we can really get a good relationship built with these legislators. And I see from Seth Parents that they've got a great relationship with theirs already. So good job, Spanish Fork. Everyone else, I'm putting out the challenge for you to beat Spanish Fork. So get out there and talk to your legislators. We're only as strong as our advocacy, which is really the strength of the league, is that we have these relationships with all 104 legislators, just not just a unique handful of legislators. So we need all of you to help us out, especially in this just bizarre year. Nick, will you go to the next slide? Another thing that's going to be different about session this year is LPC. We probably will not be able to hold it at the Capitol, and we want to continue best practices to keep everyone safe and healthy. And so we are trying to figure out ways to make LPC effective, especially because we don't want to miss those great conversations we have and policy debates that we have during session on the various bills. And so through your efforts to go online and hold your city meetings online, please let us know any recommendations you have to improve LPC, to make it more interactive, whether it's the software you use, the best practices, or anything else. We would really like to hear from you so we can make these meetings more meaningful as we head into session. And please send those suggestions into our intern, Spencer, and he'll put them together, and we will continue to work on how to make LPC more effective. And with that note, we're going to try our first polling question for the day. We threw this one in last minute because this bill popped up. It came up actually last interim, and it showed up again this month. It's Representative Thurston's bill. It used to be Senator Thatcher's bill on competency-based hiring. So Nick, if you would put that polling question up. This bill will be in government ops tomorrow, and it basically prohibits cities from requiring a minimum educational requirement for employment, except where educational qualifications are legally required to perform the duties of the position. So you can't really vet through resumes based on education. It can be something you consider, but it can't be a primary driver or something you use to sift resumes when you're hiring candidates. So if you'd fill that out, and we'll post the results. All right, Nick, if you'd go ahead and see what we've got up there. Again, this is not a vote on the bill per se, but just getting a feel for how you feel about this concept. Looks like we have a fairly strong oppose. So we'll continue working on that legislation. We'll see what the committee does tomorrow, but we will communicate that on to those who are working on that bill. So thank you everyone for sharing that. Okay, I think that finishes that agenda item.
Awesome. Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, I really do hope that I get to see any of you during this next go around, but it may not happen. It may not happen at the Capitol. So I'm glad we could do it at least this way, but I do miss seeing all of you. All right, item number 4, housing. Carson and Meg are going to talk about the Commission on Housing Affordability and legislation about accessory dwelling units and some upcoming bills. So take it away.
Thank you, Mayor Ramsey. Nick, would you mind going to the next slide? So we first want to provide a quick update on where the Commission on Housing Affordability is at. They've been meeting about every other week, so there have been a lot of discussions going on. First, I'd like to focus on there's 3 subgroups currently meeting. You're familiar with the land use and affordable housing groups, and then the rural housing group was created recently. First, the land use group has not, as far as I know, made much progress on some of the fee issues that we've alerted previously, but they have been asked to consider what, if any, land use changes might need to be made in a possible housing reinvestment zone to facilitate more affordable housing. So as far as I know, they're still sort of discussing that. The Affordable Housing Creation and Preservation Group has been meeting extensively, and they've made a lot of headway on some mutually beneficial landlord and tenant mediation programs. They'll be asking for an appropriation from the state, I believe, and Dave and Ashley Spatafor have been spearheading that effort. There's also been the discussion of creating a new tool called a housing reinvestment zone, and I'll speak more on that in a minute, but if you hear the term HRZ, that's where this is starting. Finally, the Rural Housing Group has been meeting regularly for the past 2 or 3 weeks, and they're contemplating the idea of a pre-development assistance grant. Mary House has been instrumental in these discussions, and I believe that the Commission on Housing Affordability is planning to ask for an appropriation to help with some of these costs, and they might be things like engineering costs, where it's less, your return on investment for housing production in rural Utah is more questionable, and so they're trying to help those small appropriation help offset those costs and spur some development in rural communities. Nick, can we go to the next slide, please? All right, so the housing reinvestment zone has been an area of keen interest lately for the Commission and several other stakeholder groups. The underlying premise is trying to figure out a tool for local governments to facilitate more affordable housing within a specific area. Now, I've listed a number of concepts and challenges because every time this comes up, there's some different ideas tossed out. I like to think this is sort of, we're still at the throwing spaghetti on the wall to see what sticks part of legislation. So we're still, there's been a couple different concepts discussed here. The first is, Mary House, it is spaghetti. So the first has been, much of this conversation has taken place around the enhancing transit-oriented development, because that seems to be kind of a low-hanging fruit approach. cities are generally more inclined because the infrastructure for transportation is already present. The conversations also involve tax increment, state investment, surplus property, and that's on the state and local levels, and public asset inventory. And then the development communities express interest in potential mixed use or higher density allowances in underperforming retail areas that are along transit lines. And then parking structures have also been kind of fitting to this mix. So I want to emphasize that really we're still at a point where conversations are ongoing. We've been meeting with stakeholders and legislators fairly regularly, but I don't think right now we know exactly where this will end up. But I want to put it on your radar, and we'd like to ask for your feedback about if there are additional tools you need to facilitate the housing that you want to accommodate. What might they be? Is it a CRA tool? Is it state dollars? Is it infrastructure dollars? Anything that you can think of there, we would appreciate your feedback, and we'd like to convey that on to the broader discussions.
So Carson, it looks like there's a couple of questions in the QA, and then Nick, you also said that there might be some hands raised if we want to let those people speak first.
Yes, it looks like we have Mayor Hale and Kane Loader, both from the same city, Midvale City. Do either of you have comments, sir?
Mayor Hale, you are allowed to speak right now. It looks like you are muted yourself. So if you do have a comment, go ahead and state it. And if not, I can just go ahead and lower your hand.
Okay, I was just reading this, and we have a transit-oriented, actually two of them in our city. And so we're going to be watching this very closely. They are somewhat controversial, but I think they are proper around the transit stations, and they hold a great potential for future land use and housing for citizens who require transit to get to work and back. So I'm in favor of looking at this really close.
Thank you for the feedback. Really quickly, while Nick is unmuting people, Nick, would you mind, we have another poll question just asking for your general, which of these areas you're generally interested in. Nick, would you mind putting up that poll while folks are muted and get a chance to ask questions?
Okay, looks like that poll is up. And I believe the next one we had in line with their hand up was Kane Loader. Let me just find this window here and I'll unmute you, Kane. Oh, and it looks like you may have lowered your hand there. It looks like the next one we have in line there is Joy Petro. It looks like you are unmuted, or you are muted yourself right now, but you should be able to talk.
I apologize. I was trying to pull up the questions just to follow them, and I accidentally hit the hand. So I'm good. I don't have any questions right now.
No worries. Looks like the next we have is Andrew Gruber with his hand up. Andrew, you are muted, but it looks like you should be good to talk.
Thanks, Nick. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Thanks for bringing this issue up. We at Wasatch Front Regional Council have been coordinating closely with the League of Cities and Towns and other stakeholders on this concept, which I think is fairly represented by the spaghetti against the wall image. One point that I would make briefly here is that this conversation is happening around the possibility of state legislation to do something on housing reinvestment zones. And I think it's important for all of us at the local level to keep in mind the question, when there's going to be state legislation that gets at housing and development at the local level, what is it that the state is going to do? And are they going to be establishing mandates or requirements at the local level? Or are they going to be providing incentives or resources to the local level? And that's a general debate that we've had over all of the years. And that, I think, is really still to be determined in this conversation. We'd like to think that if the state is going to pass legislation, that the way that it would best work would be that it would provide additional tools to local governments that could be helpful, and potentially also provide additional state resources at the local level for infrastructure or for making things like structured parking facilities work better. So developers could be helped with their costs. Additional infrastructure could be developed with state additional resources or tax credits with state funds as well. But the bottom line would be the state should and could participate as a partner rather than establishing more mandates on local governments for how you do your zoning. That's a principle that I think has been consistent from the league and WFRC in partnership with the league as we go forward.
Thanks, Andrew. Nick, were there any other, I'm not seeing any other hands raised, so I can jump into these two comments that were asked into the chat. The first question from Paul Larson: is the HRZ discussion far enough along to say where tax increment would come from? Would it only be cities, or would all taxing entities have to participate? And our school districts will hate this. Paul, that is an excellent question. It has been brought up in a couple different contexts. I don't know definitively where the tax increment would come from, but the concept has been brought up both in terms of having just entities who are interested. It's been brought up in the question has been brought up: what incentive could there be for other entities who might not want to participate to be involved? But I think that's still a very active question, and certainly all the taxing entities should have some say in where their increment goes. And then Adam Lenhart asked, can we ask what communities the development, or what commitments the development community is making to address this topic? It shouldn't be the sole responsibility of cities and towns. That is an excellent point as well. I don't know that the conversation has mostly been with governmental stakeholders at this point, I would say. The development community was asked in a prior meeting to bring back some suggestions for what they would like to see, but I don't know that any specific restrictions have been placed on them yet, just because the conversation hasn't quite gotten there. But the idea is that this tool could be an advantageous enough tool for local governments to use that different entities would want to participate, and it wouldn't necessarily be a state mandate or a stick kind of approach. And it looks like the poll results came in, and the number one result is transit-oriented development. And then a close second is enhanced transportation and infrastructure and parking structures. So thank you for that feedback. We'll take that back to the different stakeholder groups, but it's really helpful to know what is most useful to all of you as local government leaders. So no other questions. Let's go ahead and move on to the next slide.
Hey, Carson, this is Cam. Can I just add a couple of quick tidbits before we leave the HRZ concept?
Please.
Thank you for the feedback, Adam and Paul and others. The interesting thing here is we are all trying to figure out the right balance of how do we accommodate population growth? Where do we accommodate population growth? Where do we invest in transportation infrastructure? How do those pieces come together? One question that we keep asking in all of the meetings is, what is the exact problem that we're trying to solve with each of these potential policy tools and ideas that arise? And as Mr. Groover pointed out, and has come up a couple of times, one of the challenges that we have heard frequently has been around the efficiency of transit-oriented development, the efficiency of the land use, the cost for parking structures, the cost to ensure you have some affordable housing units, especially since the land around those transit-oriented developments is often extremely valuable land, and that drives up the overall cost of the project. So this is, this is certainly helpful. One key or two key points that have come up in other conversations that were listed in the survey, which is that you need to be aware of. Number one is this greater emphasis on looking at old commercial centers and looking at ways to modernize those commercial centers, whether that's turning them into mixed use areas or looking at rezoning to allow some housing components. We've attended a couple of national seminars or national panelists that came in to Salt Lake and presented on this in the last couple of weeks. And the Utah Land Use Institute also discussed this the other day. We'll continue to oppose any sort of state mandate around forced rezoning. But there is a lot of dialogue in the public and private sector about what COVID is going to mean to it and how it is accelerating the shift from brick and mortar retail to online retail, and what does that mean for older commercial centers. So just file that away as you're planning your communities, that there's a lot of that dialogue happening in the private sector around commercial real estate and what COVID's going to mean in the months to come. And the second piece on the surplus property is we brought in Joe Minicozy way back when we actually met in person for conferences, but back in September of 2019, who talked about the concept of public asset inventory. The league board endorsed working together with stakeholders to look at this public asset inventory concept. Again, not as a state mandate necessarily, but as a partnership to look at the public wealth of cities and school districts and counties and the state. And we've had interest from members of the congressional delegation in this concept around federal land ownership. And we've been having these discussions with school districts and higher ed and others. So these are concepts that, whether or not they make it into an HRZ concept, they are going to be around for the foreseeable future in discussions at the city level and then potentially at the state level. So I just wanted to emphasize those two key main points.
Cam, it looks like we have a hand raised from Lynn Pace. If I'll go ahead and allow him to talk now. You are muted yourself, Lynn, but you should be good.
Got it. Can you hear me, Nick?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate the league raising this discussion, and I share Andrew Gruber's comments that this is all very exploratory. The challenge that I see with this, regardless of which sort of elements rise to the top in terms of level of priority, is the funding challenge. And that is that no matter what you do, those existing tools are already being utilized. So for instance, if we would often utilize an RDA type concept tax increment to finance a housing project in a transit-oriented development area. So if the state essentially takes that for a housing reinvestment zone, it's not new money, they're just reallocating it. So I guess I would just caution that as we go through this, we want to make sure that we're getting new money and not just reallocated money, because when you go through this process, a lot of those tools are already being utilized at the local level. So for me, one of the things I think we want is not just the authorization, but we want the state's partnership. If we're going to put up local money, we want the state to put up state money. Speaking for Salt Lake City, we are really weary of being beat up for not doing enough to add housing units or more affordable housing units when Salt Lake City is spending millions of dollars every year and the state, until last year, was spending nothing. So what we really, really need is the state's financial partnership and investment in this process, not just tools to reallocate our money. Thanks.
Thanks, Lynn. And it looks like we also have a hand raised from Mayor Niehaus. So Mayor, you are muted yourself, but are good to go.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to add that I think we need to look at this through a rural lens as we're thinking through. I'm fearful that HRZs are not going to be a solution for rural Utah. School districts are going to oppose, and with good cause to do so, because it's going to take, it'll potentially threaten to take money away from the school district as population would potentially be growing, and that new revenue source would not be going to school districts. I've seen my district here oppose a CRA, and so I suspect that most school districts, especially in rural communities, are going to oppose this. And also, this is not really it doesn't feel like an immediate solution to what we're needing, especially in rural Utah, is an infusion of quick infrastructure dollars to get us going. As we know, development in rural communities can be more expensive, not just because we're further away from a Home Depot or that we have less vendors to be able to hire to do the construction. So that remoteness is a critical piece of why it's difficult to do development, but also we in rural Utah still face the need to pave roads for development. And so we have a deeper level, bringing water, sewer, electric, and paving roads to new development. And so that can make it even more expensive, which isn't, felt in our urban already developed areas. So I just wanted to share those thoughts and just caution us that we really need to look through a rural lens as well, especially if we're going to have our kids that go off to college and want to move back home, if we're going to provide them a place to live, which ultimately reduces the congestion along the Wasatch Front. Thank you.
Hey, Carson, can I add one more thing here? Thanks, Mayor Niehaus. It's an excellent point, and I'm glad you brought it up. There is, for those on the call, there is a subgroup of the commission that's looking at additional tools in rural Utah. Mayor Niehaus is representing the league on that subgroup, and league staff's involved with it as well. I think that's part of the spaghetti right now, is trying to figure out what tools don't exist that we should consider, what the role is of the state. Lynn, your point is a very good one, but it's also a double-edged sword. On one hand, right now, you don't have state involvement, and so these decisions are being driven locally, and the deals are made locally between the different taxing entities. Once the state invests some dollars, they're going to want to have a say in the deal and in the outcome. But if they're bringing considerable money, could be a good thing. So that's part of the back and forth, and trying to be consistent with our principles, but also recognize that this issue isn't going away. And so as you have additional questions or thoughts, please make sure you are passing them along here, and we'll stay in touch as these different ideas work their way through the spaghetti process.
Spaghetti making is a better term than sausage making, I think. So if that's all we have on HRZs, Nick, could we go on to the next slide? And I'll turn it over now to Victoria to discuss some of the proposals we've heard on accessory dwelling units.
All right, thanks, Carson. So Representative Ward has a bill that will be in political subdivisions on Wednesday. And we have been talking to him through the summer. He is very concerned that, or feels that ADUs or better accessibility for ADUs and the use of ADUs would help our housing problem. And so the concept that we're expecting him to pitch on Wednesday is kind of a two-pronged approach. One is that if a city has authorized an internal ADU, so this would be using your basement or attaching the ADU to your home, like through an expansion, and the owner of the home is still occupying the residence, treating that differently than an external ADU. So if you allow internal ADUs within a zone, it is a permitted use rather than a conditional use. So that would be one part of his bill. Another part of his bill is that he would change the building code so that these internal ADUs are distinguished in the building code from external or detached ADUs. The idea is that if you want to create an ADU in your basement, like a mother-in-law in your basement, you should not have to use building code requirements that then treat your home like a duplex. And some of the firewall and other regulations he sees as too onerous if you want to create this kind of internal attached ADU in your home. He has also discussed creating a grant program to help people do this. So he is seeing this as one other approach to the housing problem. And Nick, if you put up that polling question, we want to just get a sense of what people think of Representative Ward's proposal. Again, if there's comfort with the state now recognizing internal versus external ADUs, and then this building code question. So I'll give people a second to read those and then respond. And I'm happy to answer questions after that if we have any come in. Get those last answers in. All right, Nick, if you'd like to post those results. Okay, so as far as amending the state law to distinguish these two different types of ADUs, there's somewhat support for that, and that's helpful feedback as we continue to work with Representative Ward. And then about amending the building code to again differentiate between the internal and the external ADUs. Looks like we've got 41% somewhat support, and then the next closest would be that 20% strongly opposed. So thank you for filling that out. That's helpful feedback for us, and we will continue to engage and work with Representative Ward on that bill. Any questions, Nick, that we have on that one?
Victoria, we've got Tom Peterson on the call. Do you mind, Nick, giving Tom a chance to explain the building code piece?
That would be great.
Yep, Tom, if you would just like to raise your hand there, I'll be able to find you a little quicker. Perfect. And you should be good to go. Once you unmute, yep.
All right, just real briefly, Representative Ward reached out to myself and Coy Porter and Ted Black with the State Fire Marshal's Office. We met with a lot of the building departments throughout the state, and issues that were raised with this have been all over the board from city to city. And so what we found is most cities would prefer some direction because the building code does not really address an existing two-family or existing family dwelling modified to a two-family dwelling or an ADU. So we've worked with the representative along with the State Fire Marshal's Office and others to create some language that we feel addresses the concerns that were voiced within our community for safety, and hopefully addresses the concerns and gives building departments more direction and increases usability of existing housing in our cities. I don't know if you want me to go into the detail of what those look like. I'm guessing most people aren't too well versed on this, but I'm happy to if that's what you'd like.
Tom, maybe if people have specific questions, you could put your email in the chat box if you don't mind, and they could contact you for further follow-up.
I can definitely do that.
Thank you. And we have a comment from Ryan Goff. Many ADs become Airbnbs and are very difficult to provide enforcement, loud parties, and parking issues. And, you know, that's a good point. We definitely want those of you in college towns to think about this and the implications of this. And then those of you also in non-college cities and towns to think about the ramifications and help us understand those as this bill progresses. It's our understanding that Representative Ward will not be asking for a committee vote on Wednesday, although the committee, I suppose, could do that. But we're hopeful that he will continue having conversations with us, which he's been willing to do over the summer. And yes, there,
Looks like we have a
do
hand
want to
raised.
know. Oh yeah, go ahead, Nick.
This is from Lynn, and Lynn, you should be good to go.
Hi, just a quick comment on that. The comment you just raised, Victoria, about ADUs becoming Airbnbs. The thinking behind Representative Ward's policy here is that if these units, if they are in the home and the owner is in the home, the owner will sort of police any mischief. And I think that, well, that's probably true. It's very difficult for, as you all know, it's very difficult for cities to enforce or to track whether or not it is truly owner occupied. So one of the things we might think about, Victoria, is asking Representative Ward as part of his bill to give us better tools to enforce the owner occupied property. Because everyone says, oh yes, it's going to be owner occupied and I'm just going to have this mother-in-law apartment in the basement. And the next thing you know, you've got a functional duplex and the owner is nowhere to be found. He's out of state and you got a nightmare on your hands. So if we go forward with this, it might be good to ask if they can give us any enhanced tools to enforce on those other issues that we need to make sure these don't become problem properties in the neighborhood.
Thank you, Lynn. That's a very good point. And we will talk to Representative Ward about that. If you have ideas for those type of tools, that would be great.
And it looks like Tom has something more to add. So Tom, you should be good to go.
Thank you. I would just add, in our conversation, Coy Porter, who is the state fire marshal, has also served on the planning commission for Provo City and did bring up that exact concern. And so I think we do have some cities that have dealt with this issue that would be very well versed on how to handle this, maybe from a state perspective. I'm sure Salt Lake City and Lynn would be able to add some extreme value in that aspect as well.
Thank you, Tom. And then Don Shelton said, you know, are we okay with the idea of effectively double the population in the neighborhood? What about the impact on schools, roads, and other infrastructure? And those questions are the questions that just keep coming up with all of these housing debates. If we're trying to create density, what does that do to infrastructure, to the schools? So those questions are excellent questions and ones we need to keep asking as we keep trying to navigate all the spaghetti noodles being thrown at the housing issue. Unless we have, Carson, Cam, go ahead.
Thanks, Councilmember Shelton. It's an excellent question. We haven't seen the bill yet from Representative Ward, but then the concept that's been discussed is that if South Jordan were to decide ADUs don't make sense in South Jordan, there would not be a state mandate, but South Jordan would have to allow ADUs. That's different than in California, where the California Assembly mandated that all cities of a certain size had to allow ADUs. So you would still have the authority in South Jordan to say it makes sense here, it doesn't make sense there. Really what he's trying to do is say, if you're going to allow ADUs, is there a way to facilitate individuals who are still living in the house being able to utilize a portion of their house that's within the house as an ADU without it turning into a duplex? And the his argument on the schools, roads, and infrastructure is that that family may have had 8 people living there, but now is down to just 2, the empty nesters, and so they're looking to rent out a portion of the house, but it'll still be less than what the population was before. Whether you agree or disagree with that argument, I mean, that's the policy argument that he's making. And like Tom Peterson said, there's been a lot of uncertainty around the state building code when it comes to ADUs. And so hopefully providing some clarity there could make it easier for people to use their local ordinances to then allow for ADUs. So in the case of his hometown of Bountiful, Bountiful has an ADU ordinance where they now allow for ADUs, if memory serves, in every residential zone in the city. And Kate or Gary, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's in every zone in the city. And so what he's saying is, can we make an improvement at the state level in the building code to make it easier for people to then take advantage of the local ordinance? Hey, good, I was right. Phew. Thanks, Kate. And then Victoria, there was a question above that from Jennifer McGrath, I believe.
See, Jennifer asks, also, are we concerned about unintended consequences of changes to the building code regarding life and safety? And, this is where we will definitely be working with and talking to Tom's group, who are experts in the building code. Tom, I don't know if there's anything else you want to say about that. Okay.
Be good,
Am
Tom.
I muted?
Oh,
Can you hear me?
Yes.
yes, go ahead, Tom.
It's definitely a concern that we take very seriously. Life safety is a top priority for us. And there are, like I said, there are things that we believe in the event that the unit is owner occupied, there are some trade-offs that are available that we believe will not compromise life safety. This is something that the State Fire Marshal's Office and myself and many others have discussed in depth. And we definitely don't take that lightly. We will be taking this through the Uniform Building Code Commission to have it evaluated from their level as well. So it won't be something that we just willy-nilly come up with and try to push forward. It's something we want to vet through all the proper channels to make sure that there's a level of comfort that is achieved in doing this. So I hope that addresses your concerns. We will not just throw out the safety codes that we enforce.
Thank you, Tom. And then we've got Kate's note that she still has concerns about the bill and the state furthering inserting themselves into ADUs. And yes, anytime you see the state defining a new term, that's usually been the purview of local government. You worry about cracks in the surface and then just digging in any further. So as this bill progresses, we'll keep you updated. All right, let's go on to the next housing item, which if Nick, you would put the slide up, which is the HB 374 report, and I'll hand that back over to Carson.
Thanks, Victoria. First off, I want to thank all of you cities for participating in the reporting form. I know it's onerous on top of all of the other work you're trying to do to accommodate growth, and I know your planning departments are swamped. So I want to say we really appreciate how much time your planners took to fill these out. We had about 70 cities respond to the forms, and we also recognize that not all of those 82 cities who we were trying to target for information even do their own building. A lot of them contract out with other counties or other agencies. So we feel pretty good about that data set. And we've spent our intern Spencer Colley and I have spent a good amount of time looking through the data and headphone fell out and seeing what it says. The good news is the data says that most cities are compliant with the 14 and 21 day requirements for plan review and inspection. There's a couple of cities who I think may have reported a little bit differently and not taken out of account the time that it took for developers to get plans back to them, but the majority of the cities look like they're well within those timelines. And a number of cities identified challenges with personnel, being that with city budgets being kind of strained, a lot of cities instituted hiring freezes, and so some planning departments have been particularly challenged through this period of rapid growth. Can we go to the next slide, Nick? So this is just a quick summary of the data. And I took both the plan review for residential and commercial. You can see here, it's broken out on the first little graph. The statutory review is 14 days. So as you all know, you have 14 days to get the process, to get the plan review process completed. But that does not include time for developer or property owner to get, while you're waiting for them to get information back to you. So again, the average was well within those days. And then the commercial, which has a 21-day cap, was a similar result. So we're optimistic about this data. We think it tells a really good story. But I do want to acknowledge we've heard that the same bill, HB 374, is in its original language maybe back this year. So there may be additional attempts to restrict plan review authority. Can we go to the next slide, Nick? So I want to use that as a segue into the Senate Bill 34 progress reports. The data we've gotten from you on HB 374 will be absolutely essential as we fight off further attacks on plan review authority, because we have the data, we have strong evidence to make an argument that cities, you all are doing you're following statute and you're doing your best to meet timelines under difficult situations. I think the same can be said of Senate Bill 34. The deadline for the first progress report is coming up. It's December 1st. And this reporting will be absolutely essential in demonstrating that cities are working on SB 34 and engaged. We know the pandemic has had significant repercussions on housing markets, and that's kind of renewed a lot of pressure from the development community and legislators and state government stakeholders to redefine the roles of local government in housing and land use. So getting this information in is absolutely essential. And we have some information on our website. We'll be sending out a recap later this week with some additional information, both on Senate Bill 34 and some of these other items that we're discussing today. But I want to put that on your radar that these reports are absolutely critical, and this next stage will probably define the next few years of this land use policy discussion. Can we go to the next slide, Nick? Thanks. I want to highlight a few op-eds. We highlighted one. There's been a series of 3 submissions to the Deseret News from Thomas Wright regarding, well, housing specifically, but in each there's usually a focus on NIMBYism, but also on local government authority. And there's been an underlying narrative that local governments are not doing enough to promote housing, and that local government policies are obstructing the market, and it's hindering housing development. And I wanted to include a quote from the most recent article. Even with more flexible zoning laws, municipalities are still impeding the affordable housing market through their fee structures. Until both are drastically changed, affording a home will continue to be unattainable for many Utahns. And we're currently planning on putting together either an op-ed or a series of op-eds to respond and rebut to each of these points because they're fallacious. But we want to put it on your radar that this is still the narrative that's, I'd say, pervasive at the Capitol and among a number of legislators. Could you go to the next slide, Nick? So I mentioned that there's this false narrative, and I think that the data really shows that cities are not hindering the process, that you're all actively planning for growth. I have a quick slide here on the left. The graph demonstrates that we've had record-breaking years almost this whole decade coming out of the recession, and cities don't build housing and we permit it. So much of the units produced depend on market and land availability. But despite that, cities are still finding ways to permit more housing every year. 2020 is only partial, so you'll see that there's a slight downturn there. We expect, and the number of analysts also expect it to be either a slight record-breaking year or at least produce the same amount of units as we did last year. And I want to highlight that residents trust you to plan for growth more than any other level of government. And we think that's a really important point to take to your legislators when you discuss it with them. Your legislators aren't the ones in angry meetings about density. Your legislators aren't the ones hearing from residents about insufficient transportation. So the more we can get across this point that cities aren't just being obstructive, that you're actively planning for growth and you're planning for housing and you're planning housing and transportation together, the better. So finally, here's our ask for you on housing. So first, the Senate Bill 34 data. Again, that's paramount to report to the Department of Workforce Services. We'll send out more information on how to do that if you've not already. Meg Ryan on our staff put together a really useful tips page to walk you through the reporting process. It shouldn't be nearly as onerous as the original requirement was. So we're hoping that we'll be able to get all 82 cities who are required under the statute to comply with that. And then HB 374 data, if you haven't submitted and you still like to, please get that to us. We probably will already have the report submitted to the legislature per HB 374's requirement, but any additional information on plan review that we can get will be helpful in taking back to the legislature this session. And keep an eye out for the rebuttal about fees and zoning growth. And I cannot express this enough, and you'll be tired of hearing about it, but really talking to your legislators is the best way to help them understand what you're seeing on the ground and kind of humanizing the issue beyond just the talking heads that we need more housing and we need more flexible zoning policies. So thank you again for all you're doing on this front. I know your communities are all challenged by this, and we really applaud how you're making inroads.
Thank you, Carson, and all of you, Carson and Meg, Victoria, Cam, everybody who's weighed in and everyone who's participated in this discussion. Carson, for what it's worth, I like the spaghetti on the wall graphic. When I first saw it, I thought, what? Yeah, anyway, it's good. It's really good. Okay. Next, that leads us right into a continued discussion, similar to what we've already been talking about. Victoria is going to talk to us, give us an update on the land use task force.
Thank you, Mayor Ramsey. I'm going to walk through what the land use task force has been working on and where they are on each issue. And if you have any questions at the end, I'll try and answer those.
Victoria?
Oh, go ahead.
Real quick, we just have a hand raised from Paul Larson. Yeah. Paul, you should be good to talk once you unmute yourself.
Okay. My question just had to do with the SB 34 reporting. It's less incomprehensible than last year's form, but it still has some things going on that make it a little hard to put together. And maybe this is a question for Meg. The spreadsheet that Meg sent out is very helpful and very useful to try to report on multiple strategies. Would the state accept that spreadsheet submission along with the PDF that they sent us as our report? The dilemma is we have, I believe, 9 different strategies to report on, and there's only space in the PDF fillable form for one.
The answer is yes, Paul.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Paul, for that question. All right, I'm going to walk through the land use task force. We won't have time to get into a lot of detail, but if there are questions at the end, I'm happy to try and answer them. All right, Nick, if you go to the next slide, these are the issues that are in the final stages. They've been sent to Ledge Research, and we hope to see the final language soon. Annual training for planning commissioners. This would require 1 hour on LEDMA and 3 hours other courses provided through the league or city staff. And so the city attorney could provide that training or choose from some of the offerings that we have here on the league or that we facilitate to them. Impact fees, this is a fairly simple bill, is clarifying an existing statute that allows a local entity to use impact fees to pay for the impact fee facilities plan and analysis. This is already allowed in statute, but the language is pretty, it requires you to do a few double negatives. So we're just trying to clarify that. Conditional use permits, we will be modifying that statute in Title 10 and Title 17, that those conditional use standards must be objective. Nick, if you would go to the next. Also in the final stages is a bill that Representative Waldrop is working on annexation and incorporation. First of all, it deals with cross-county boundary annexations. This is the issue that was highlighted due to legislation passed during the spring special sessions, and then some of the issues that have come from Hideout and Park City. The idea is that the legislation would require the property owner to first approach cities within their county where their property is located. And then if those cities are not interested in annexing, the property owner could then go across the county boundary and look at a city over there, but then talk to that external county who would hold a hearing and issue a decision based on some statutory standards and either authorize or decline the annexation, at which point, if they authorize it, the property owner could then file an annexation request with that external county city. Nick, if you would go to the next slide. Also on that bill, he's looking at changing some of the annexation and the incorporation notification requirements, and you can see those there. But it's really bringing those more in line with what's required by first-class counties for annexation notice, and then what's already done for large landowners in incorporation. And then he's also looking at creating a second opt-out in the incorporation process to give landowners a second bite of the apple if they do not want to be included in incorporation. So those bills, consensus has been achieved at, although the devil's always in the details, and we're waiting to see final language from Ledge Research. Next slide, Nick. All right, these are still in process. You can see we've still got a lot of work to do before session starts. We don't have consensus on these issues. Some are closer than others, but we're still working on them. One is low impact development. The idea behind this is to establish maximum pavement width for cities that require low impact development. There's still a lot of concern on this issue by our members. Nothing has been agreed to, and we're still working on that. Boundary line adjustments, there's a lot of confusion in the code between boundary line agreements and boundary adjustments, and so we're trying to clean some of that up. And then the local districts came and asked for some statutory clarification on the authority for a water district or provider to review and approve a plat at the time of subdividing or vacating, and then some potential language about easements in there. Development agreements have been the focus of some litigation over the last year, and the courts have found some local government. The most recent was a district court case out of Tooele regarding the gravel pit there, that Tooele unlawfully engaged in contract zoning, meaning they entered an agreement to bypass some statutory requirements. There's some concern that this recent case law is going to make it very hard to use development agreements. So we're trying to find language so the legislature can give direction to the courts. Building permits and vesting. This is to clarify that building permits are a separate process from the land use approval process, and that the building code can only be changed by the legislature. Some developers have had some issues with some confusion with cities about when vesting happens and how that interplays with their building permits, so we're trying to work on that. And then finally, it would not be a real 2020 issue if gravel pits were not still lingering out there. We are working hard on a draft and talking to the operators. We're hopeful to get some consensus, but it's been a difficult issue and we're still working on that. as far as how gravel pits can be regulated if they're existing, if they're new, or if the operator is trying to expand their operations. Nick, if you'd go to the next. And then these are the no-goes, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we won't see legislation pop up all of a sudden. So we had a proposal from the Property Rights Coalition to bifurcate the land use appeal standard and also change the appeal standard. We told them that we were not interested. Last we talked to them, they said they were going to come back with a new proposal, but we have not seen that yet. And then PIDs, in the spring, the PRC wanted to allow PIDs to be created without local government approval. Our board rejected that proposal and said that any legislation that would not give government approval when a PID was created was a no-go. So we're hoping to not see that. And I see a question about the PID committee the PID bill in committee this Wednesday. So there is a PID bill on the Economic Development and Workforce Services agenda sponsored by Senator McKay. It's our understanding that this was a request from the local districts, that they felt like PIDs aren't really local or special service districts like they are, and wanted to move the PID language out of the code. It's our understanding that this bill will not do anything substantive to PIDs other than move them to another part of the Utah code. So hope that's helpful. You're welcome. All right, Nick, if you go to the next slide, that brings us to our next agenda item, Madam Chair. But if there are any other questions, I'm happy to answer those. I know that was really quick and dirty, but we've got a lot still hanging out there on land use.
Mayor Ramsey, I'll go if that's okay.
Great. Okay. Well, then, Wayne, fees. Please,
Thank you.
our new fee schedule is being proposed.
So at the last LPC, I brought up that there was an audit that is ongoing with 5 cities that were looking at their building codes, their building inspection fees, and their business license fees. And it's our understanding that the auditor's office is kind of marching through various forms of government that charge fees. They did a report in February of 2020 with higher ed, and they're determining that there needs to be a reasonable fee test, meaning there has to be a reason for charging the fee and a direct benefit generally for the person that you're charging a fee to. In the higher ed audit, they found that higher ed charges every student a study abroad fee, but have a very small portion of their actual student body that go and study abroad. So they assert that is an inappropriate fee. It doesn't meet their reasonable fee test. And it's largely based off of a case from years ago against the state, where they were trying to charge a tax on gas companies, or a fee on gas companies, and charged to everyone. And ultimately it was determined that that was a tax. And so that is what the auditor's office is looking at your fees to see if they're reasonable, to see if there's a direct benefit. And as the auditor's office is going through this process, the legislature has garnered some interest in this as well. And we think that there could potentially be a bill this next session where the legislature clarifies the difference between a tax and a fee for all forms of government. So not only for local government, for the state, for counties, and for cities and towns, that the standard for a tax and the standard for a fee, and what you need to do to establish that fee. So as we know right now, there are some standards around impact fees. There's some guidance on your business licenses, but it would go to all fees that you generally charge, and have a standard, have a potential review process for that, and then have some connection between those you're charging the fee to and the service you're providing. So we'd like to do just a quick poll with everyone to ask if you already have a process in place, recognizing that for a majority of your fees, there's not necessarily a state mandate. We want to get a sense of, do you have in place already the opportunity within your community to look at your fees and review those fees on a regular basis? this is outside of your city council approving the fee. Is there something that happens before it goes to your city council where you're regularly looking at those fees and determining that they're appropriate for what you're charging and that there's a benefit to your residents? So if you want to go ahead and take that poll, and then I'll see if Cam has any other comments that he wants to add to this conversation.
Thank you, Wayne. As you're filling this out, fees are not a new issue before the legislature, but what's different this year is you have the audit that the auditor's office did about higher ed, and they're looking at parallels with local government. You have the litigation in Pleasant Grove over the transportation utility fee, and then you have the push on the housing side from those in the development community around fees. So you have a variety of different pressure points that are pushing this issue forward. The good news is we feel like we're pretty prepared in order to counter some of the narrative based on some of the research we've done internally over the last few years and the coordination we've done thus far. So I'm curious to see the poll question results here.
Great. So it looks like, you know, there's close to even just dispersion on having a process or not. And in our conversation with legislators, we've communicated that if we have a formal process, that means fees could potentially be going up. And the response is, we don't care about the level of the fee. We're concerned about the process. And so, you know, just trying to clarify that this isn't necessarily an attack on any specific fee. It's just that they want to have more of a process in place for all levels of government when it comes to the fees that we're charging. So we just want to make everyone aware that that's coming up, and we'll continue to have conversations and bring more information to you as it develops.
And Wayne, I should add too that they're also looking at state fees being part of this fee test. So it really is a comprehensive look at fees of which we are a part.
I'm trying to unmute. Sorry, Wayne, thank you so much for that. Appreciate that. Now, Cam, last but not least, let's have you walk us through public safety. This is a comprehensive update. I don't know how much you intend to share. Take it away.
Just a couple minutes. We're running up against the 4:30 time. Ashley asked a question. They may say they don't care about the level of fee, but wait until there's one complaint, and they'll care about the level of fee. And that has been one of the words of warning we've given to a couple of legislators and Auditor Dougal, that the result of this could be a justified fee increase, which could then bring some pushback, and then you put cities in a really difficult spot. So anyway, stay tuned. We think this one's going to pick up some additional momentum in the days and weeks to come. Speaking of issues with momentum, the public safety context has 73 open bill files as of Friday night, which was the last time I looked. There were 73 open bill files around law enforcement and criminal justice, and that did not include several bills that I was expecting to see that just aren't listed as public yet. You can see here the variety of topics within those 73. Some of these are non-starters for us. Some of these have been discussed within the Department of Public Safety Big Tent meeting. We've told you before about our task force. Many of you have either representatives from your city on the task force or serve on our task force. It's been meeting twice a month since the end of July. The task force has yet to make any official recommendations yet, in part because we were trying to focus on the listen phase and make sure that there was general understanding and consensus about the problems we were actually trying to solve, like trying to get past the spaghetti phase from earlier and really focus in on acknowledging and understanding the problems we were trying to solve before we immediately jumped to this policy idea or that policy idea. In the last few meetings, we've done a deep dive into the process of officer discipline and communication. And to summarize it, it really comes down to this. How do we ensure that when there is an open investigation internal investigation into an officer's conduct, and that officer leaves the city. Let's use my hometown of Murray. If Officer Deal works in Murray City, there's an open investigation about Officer Deal, yours truly, and I leave Murray City. Currently, there is a gap in the communication between Murray City and, say, the hiring city that may be interviewing me to take a position, as well as the role of post, which has certain authority over certain types of misconduct and also provides the certification for all officers. So what we've done in our deep dives the last couple of meetings within the task force is to look into how do we fill those communication gaps so that we can ensure trust within the general public in the process of completing officer investigations and ensuring that communication between agencies. Senator Iwamoto and Representative Perry will be presenting a concept to the Law Enforcement Interim Committee tomorrow morning. The task force has not yet made a recommendation on this concept, but it just does what I've basically just described, trying to ensure the communication between, in my example, Murray City and Post, that there's still an open investigation into that officer, and thus trying to facilitate the completion of that investigation before the officer goes to Mayor Camp. Mayor Camp just texted, for those who can't say it, don't leave camp. Good officers are hard to find. As you know, my heart is always in Murray. So thanks for the chuckle. Long story short, Senator Iwamoto's bill moves the needle to a degree. We've told her that in addition to the dialogue between the agency and Post, which is what her bill contemplates, we also need some clarifications in code between what Murray City could say to the potential hiring agency. Because right now there's some inconsistency there, and there are some obstacles that we need to overcome. We have discussed these concepts with the fraternal order police. We've discussed these concepts within our task force, which includes the Chiefs of Police Association. We've discussed them with the Sheriff's Association, community stakeholders. Generally speaking, everyone seems to be on the same page that we want to facilitate the completion of the investigations and facilitate the information sharing. It's how we get from point A to point B that we're still trying to work through. Once the task force meets, which they'll be meeting later this week, once the task force meets and provides a recommendation, we'll bring it back here to LPC prior to the start of the general session of the legislature. Again, Senator Iwamoto's bill has a component of it tomorrow, but it still needs another component in another section of code for the interagency communication. In addition to the dialogue around discipline and communication, there's also been a lot of discussion within the Department of Public Safety Big Tent meeting around annual training requirements. For those of you who are not police officers, which includes me, I'm not, but I have two cousins who are, they have to go through 40 hours of training each year on top of their certification training that they received through the academy when they first became police officers. On top of that, if they're part of SWAT teams or if they're part of other specialized units, they have additional training above and beyond the 40 hours. As a result, one concern that we've raised in these conversations has been, if you increase that annual training to such a degree, what you're doing is you're actually taking officers off the street and putting them into the additional training. We also recognize that there are additional topics out there that should be considered as part of the regular training, whether it's annually or another period of time. Ogden City did a tremendous presentation to our task force a couple of weeks ago about the amount of training that they require of their officers. We have some internal data that we've collected from police agencies and departments around the state to see how much training they're currently requiring. And so we're actually trying to take a look at the existing requirements to see how can you incorporate some of these other topics, for example, implicit bias training or de-escalation training. So that's something, again, there's not consensus on it yet, but that's been one of the key points of discussion are the training requirements. And then the third piece is on the recruitment and retention, and that's been a major point. That's been a major point about how you recruit and how you retain quality employees, particularly in the current culture. And so that's something we've brought up in many of the meetings as well. So Mayor Ramsey, rather than going through the 73 open bill files, that gives you at a high level. Again, our task force has not made any recommendations yet, but that'll likely come in the upcoming meetings. And then every 2 weeks, we're meeting in these big tent DPS meetings to discuss these different concepts, and we'll see what makes its way up the chain of command as we work closer to the legislative session.
Thank you. Thanks, Kim. And thanks to everybody, all of you who have anyone from your city who are working on this task force and having these discussions and really bringing local government to the table along with our chiefs of police and counties. And just thank you. This is an important discussion and we want to make sure that we're part of it. And we are, and we're leading it. And our Love, Listen, Lead task force is really doing an outstanding job. Appreciate that and look forward to getting some feedback soon about some public perception and some progress made on this. Anyway, let's see. Before we adjourn, I think you have some homework for everybody, right? Do you want to give us all our marching orders and then we'll prepare to adjourn?
We definitely do. Nick, if you'd go to the next slide, I'll just go through these. Once again, we are calling on all of you to go out and reach out to your legislators and talk to them. Help them understand the role of local government. New legislators in particular, I have experience from my previous job is they get really excited because they can open a bill file and make some state laws. So help them understand this balance between what the state does well and what local government does well. And help them look at the outcomes and also, let them know we want to collaborate, that this doesn't have to be antagonistic. We want to work together. So everyone, please reach out to your legislators before session. Next slide. So again, if we can get any recommendations to help improve LPC, we'd love to hear it. In fact, if you have thoughts about how today went with the polling questions or raising hands, you can put in the chat box or email us. But Spencer will be taking your recommendations to help us get a better LPC as we enter this virtual session reality. Third, housing homework. Please submit those SB 34 reports. It's really important and the deadline is fast approaching. So get those in, contact Meg if you have any questions. We'd also like your feedback on HRZs and ADUs. We've brought up some good discussion points today, but you're welcome to email and reach out to Carson on those. And if you have any feedback or thoughts on fees or questions, please contact Wayne, and those emails are there. And again, on housing, please talk to your legislators. As we've talked about today, there are a lot of ideas floating around there about housing. It's received a lot of press lately. We're talks about it in the gubernatorial election. So help your legislators understand the city's role in housing, how you use your fees, how you set them, the role of local authority, and help them have a better understanding of the complexity of zoning and your work on zoning, so that when we head into this housing debate and the bills addressing it during session, they have a good contact with you to ask questions. And we will be checking on your homework. So if you are one of those cities that were in the earlier table who has a new incumbent legislator, we will be following up in the next few weeks to see if you actually reached out to them. So you have been warned that we will be pestering you and seeing if you've talked to them, or if not, how we can help facilitate you to do that. And that's it. Here's the calendar for LPCs coming up. Again, we plan on this happening virtually during session, but fingers crossed that we maybe get to meet in person. We'll see how it goes. If you have any questions, please reach out to us and contact us, and we're happy to help. And that's the homework.
Thank you. There's never a shortage of projects and things for all of us to work on, and it really does take all of us. I appreciate all of you being part of the League Army, and we will continue to work together in whatever form that looks like, whether it's virtual or in person or some sort of hybrid as we roll along with this. Look forward to having you join us on December 14th, and that's going to be a kind of a fun meeting, at least at the start. I think the opportunity for us to thank the governor for his efforts in our behalf, I think that will be a great thing. So look forward to seeing you virtually December 14th. And unless anybody has anything else, if you do, put it in the chat very quickly. I am not seeing anything else or any hands raised. That being the case, I'm not going to call for a motion to adjourn in this format. I'm just going to declare this meeting adjourned and thank all of you for being here with us and look forward to joining with you again on December 14th. Thanks, everyone. Be safe. Get your reports in.